Now, the site itself is known as the Black Friary in the town of Trim, County Meath, Ireland. And County Meath is on this side of Ireland. It's about 45 kilometres north of Dublin and about 40 kilometres south of the border between Northern Ireland. And this site itself, when we look at this site, it's the work at this site sort of has implications for our monastic houses, Scotland's monastic houses, those people over the borders, monastic houses. And one thing that we're learning from this site is that it's an intact area that's being excavated that notes a period in time that hitherto we used to rely upon the historical record, when the archaeology is actually telling us slightly different from what the historical record is saying. With this site, they're finding not tons, but they're finding a substantial amount of glass scattered across the site. They're finding Purbeck marble across the site. They're finding bits of carved stone. They're finding areas of stone that are still in their original trenches and so on. They're finding little bits of lead here and there. They're finding bits of pottery. They're finding wonderful bits of archaeology that is being excavated today, 2010, 2019, and the site itself gives us a completely different picture, and we will look directly into it. It may be an island, but it tells us a great deal. Trim, the existing town of Trim itself, is an Anglo-Norman town, and it's got its own castle. There's an Augustinian tower still standing. We'll look at this monastic order in a short while. And this site itself bids the question of before the Normans actually got to Ireland, did the Irish have monastic houses before the Normans got there? Now, Kathy's going to say, of course they did. So why have none of them survived? Hang on. Most of the monastic houses that do survive are Norman monastic houses. 99% of all monastic houses surviving in Wales are Norman. And then you look at before the Normans, there must have been monastic houses, but all traces of those monastic houses have more or less been erased everywhere. And one strange moment in history, one strange sort of thing in history is that you look at the Catholics in Ireland. Now, those Catholics in Ireland are based on the Norman model of Catholicism. And it's quite ironic that Catholicism is used against those masters that have been masters of Ireland for a very, very long time, the English. And it's very strange that Norman Catholicism has been used against those paymasters from England ever since. An irony of history. This site and the archaeology, as you can see, is virtually a foot under the surface, metres under the surface, large amount of rubble to be found scattered across this site. And the idea that I will project to you about what was happening with the stained glass and what was happening with the lead. And we'll look at all those wonderful questions. Not too much in the way of images today, one or two images of glass, one or two images of artifacts, one or two images of walls that exist, and one or two areas where walls no longer exist. But this site is completely intact in area. The archaeology isn't completely intact because there's no buildings above the ground level. However, the archaeology is intact. It's never been built on. It's never been disturbed. It's never been raped and pillaged. And that's an interesting thing. This is a Black Friary. Dominican or Benedictine. We'll come on to that in a short while, which order we're talking about. When we look at the Black Friary in Cardiff, we look at the archaeology in a very poor state of preservation as you see it, because the archaeology The excavations were undertaken there over 100 years ago, causing untold damage to the archaeological record, except this site has never been excavated until the past decade or so. There's been little explorations. This site is an ongoing excavation. Let's look at another image. And the one thing that we do see, if we think of parallels, oh, and by the way, if you want to be involved in this excavation for 2 weeks, you're not going to see much change of £4,000. And this is a very sought after archaeological excavation. I'm in the wrong blooming business, aren't I? And this is because the training on this archaeological site is second to none. Except I did make the statement last week about the excavations at Rousey being the best archaeological excavations taking place anywhere in Britain at this moment. And I would say they are, but the training at this site is extremely brilliant as well. One question that they've still got is, where are the friars buried? They're not buried in the chancel that they found, but many hundreds of people are buried underneath the car park. Which is within the civilian cemetery associated with this wonderful Friary site. Human bones are being excavated, and lots of the human remains are in a very good state of preservation. And that tells you maybe that the diet with those people at Trim was very, very high. What happened to this site? The dissolution of the monasteries in 1542. I always say that the dissolution of the monasteries was one of the best things that the British government ever did for this country, okay? Redistribution of wealth amongst the rich, and then the redistribution of wealth amongst the poor. Within 100 years, people are owning their own farms, formerly on church land, which is a great progression. Up until that point, people had been serfs on the land. There was no way they could ever own land. So dissolution of the monasteries gave us all that. Lots of human remains that have been excavated tell us that there's this great sense of disarticulation, where you've got human remains and then plonked directly alongside those human remains, maybe taken out an arm or a head. There's another set of human remains. Thousands of bodies are to be found underneath that car park and the supermarket and elsewhere. But the Friary cemetery we haven't actually found yet. And when we think about this site, in a way, the dissolution of the monasteries didn't give closure to the site at all, because the cemetery extended into the old monastic site, extended into that area where people could actually bury their children in the chancel area, when they couldn't have done so earlier. They couldn't have buried anywhere in consecrated ground. If a child dies before about 1 or 2 years old, before they're baptised or christened or whatever, in this case christened, they're there to be just meant to be disposed of somewhere else, but people are able to take this opportunity now. So there we go. And lots of these sets of human remains. Look how close to the surface they are. Not too far away at all. And it's testament to the fact that this site has never ever been built on, and the archaeology, again, that has survived is a good state of preservation, and gives us methods and models to understand archaeology. Just because you don't find a wall there anymore, let's try and trace where that wall is. And in fact, the geophysical survey in 1988 and later geophysical survey and now LADAR survey in 2017 has shown, even with walls completely erased from time, that time capsule is still to be traced in the ground. Good use of wording there. So what we're going to do is show you where this site is. Let's see a little bit of a map. We've got a map. You go, Ellen. I haven't heard from Ellen. She was looking after hedgehogs last week. She couldn't leave them. Right. She described them all on the top half of her body, keeping them warm, and she couldn't leave them, keeping them alive as her heart raced and pumped alongside the racing hearts of the hedgehogs. Yeah. And we must appreciate the love that she has for those creatures. get on with it. Right, Ireland, there we go. Dublin, border, Trim, archaeology up by there, and it's very fine state of preservation. And when we're looking, in a way, it's trying to understand what's going on in Ireland. It's the same. The Irish have the same experience as the people of Cymru, as the people of Wales. We've got the same experience, and what that experience is, over a long period of time, the Irish are being ground down. We were ground down for over 200 years. First of all, Chepstow Castle, within weeks of the Normans conquering the southern half of England, we have Chepstow Castle being built, and now we've got to wait until 1284 for the whole of Wales to be subjugated under English rule. And the Irish have got a similar experience, but it's bit by bit with the Irish. It's and with our land, it's bit by bit. Where with Scotland, there's a different experience altogether there. And this sort of getting into the religion, you get into the religion, you can get into the people's minds, you can control them, and you can control the aristocracy, because that's the church axle that creates the control of the aristocracy, that the king can have over the aristocracy eventually. The Irish experience is as bloody as our experience. Kingship and princelyship is erased from the face of Ireland, and you don't often hear about the King of Ireland anymore, do you? But apparently one or two lines of the descendancy is actually still out there, but that's another question altogether.
Was he called Lot? L-O-T-T? Somebody with King Lot, was it?
King Lot does ring a bell. Kathy, you're very much into that type of thing. Yeah, King Lot does ring a bell.
Yeah, because we had an ex-racing greyhound in one of his titles was that. That's why I wondered.
Ex-racing greyhound?
He was an ex-racing greyhound.
And he was called Lot?
Mr. Lot.
Mr. Lot, King of Ireland.
Yeah.
The early excavations in 2010, as you can see, the earlier excavations take us very shallowly to the walls themselves, thanks to the geophysical survey that had actually taken place in 1988. And what we're going to do, we're going to get straight onto that geophysical survey. And there it is. Geophysical survey. So, what we do have is I've got a modern sort of LiDAR plan. I've got this geophysical survey. For the sake of argument, for now, until we actually get to it, what we can basically work out here in this field, to give you an idea where we're talking about again. The field that we're talking about is up here. So it's outside and it's within a strange area, but this whole area has got a sense of street names to do with the Friary, and you've got the down here you've got the Augustine Tower still standing. It's all that sort of sense. And in a way it's like the sense of Cardiff, because those green open spaces in Cardiff, in a way, one or two of them, so you've got the Greyfriars and you've got the Black Friary. Up until the 1960s, 70s, the Friary in Cardiff, the Greyfriars, were still standing. An open spaced area. That if people had been a little bit more wiser back then, that building would still be with us and would be a wonderful tourist attraction. However, that wasn't the case. It was all pulled down. But we still got the Black Friary. You can imagine these sort of open spaces in some towns and cities are still there. But this is in a really fine area where the archaeology is extremely well preserved. And if we go back again to the geophysical survey, and what we can see from the geophysical survey is a huge cloister area. This is apparently the biggest cloister area anywhere in Ireland, one of the biggest in Europe. There's a tower here. You've got the chancel here. Hello. All right then. This area here, the porch. You've got the tower, the belfry tower. You've got the chancel here. You've got all the sort of winged areas around here. maybe the cemetery is in this area, they haven't really found it. The other part of the cemetery is down here. This is a civilian cemetery. This is where that supermarket is. So they've got a huge cemetery down here. Lots of the place names, Priory Road, Priory Street, those sort of place names are actually still there within the landscape. And they're finding bits and bobs all the time, but this is completely intact. Even though some of the walls here, are not to be seen traceable in the masonry, there's to be traceable in the traces of the trenches that survive today. And what we've got sort of at the end, we've got an interim report of some of the excavations that have been undertaken. I did actually look at the Facebook entry that they got updates on, but it wasn't too hot on this side. But you can actually see, from that you can actually make it out. And this is the technology of geophysical survey. What the LADAR has done is like put a little bit more meat on the bones, a few more boundaries and things that we'll actually look at. But this huge field itself isn't built on. Why isn't it built on? Well, obviously they must have respected this site. They may have wished that this site is to be left for generation after generation, sort of intact for whatever reason, but it's an open field, a green field that the archaeologists can excavate to their heart's delight. We've got a much better aerial survey coming up, but again, this field, within all these sort of street arrangements, we do have a plan coming up as well. And again, this wasn't in the beating heart of the town. Most of these orders, the Grey Friars, the Black Friars, the White Friars, and you've also got the Red Friars, and all these different sort of orders and so on, were usually placed outside the limits of the town. But this one completely survives today. It's not been overtaken by modern building. What I want to do is we've got loads of little notes and so on, loads of little images, and we'll look at this bit of a plan. Yes, that's one of the chief archaeologists working on the site. And the other thing as well is most of the people working on this site are women again.
That's a shame.
It's not a shame. Alan wants to go on one of these excavations just to see the women. Right. I'm just chucking this in here. What sense this makes. Now, I didn't want to do loads and loads of plans and stuff. I just wanted to. We don't usually look at plans. I just wanted to put a tiny little thing in, and we'll look at these again. That's the wall as it extends out. So you've got the sort of core of the wall, and this is the wall as you look at the face. And they've done so many different plans like that, and you get little bits of wall still standing that have been sliced too. So all this has been robbed out here. The other side has been robbed out. These little bits of the wall have been robbed out. Lots of robbing of walls, but some bits of walls still remain intact. Little bits of sort of carved stone still remain intact. Lots of dressed stone still remain intact. It's basically, at times throughout history, the site has been consistently robbed for its masonry, but lots of those traces still remain. And the process of robbing a site is equally important. What we do think of, back to something I've already said, we think, well, the rich inherited these sites and the wealth associated with these sites. But the people actually doing the work to demolish these sites were not the rich people. Though these were the people with their carts and wagons, and they wanted to get as much material off the site as they possibly can. Lots of the masonry made its way into building lots of houses within the town itself. And we have loads of different sections of process where it's almost as if at one stage, after 1542, the whole site was gutted. But then again, that didn't affect the lead that was in the windows. Maybe the lead was taken out first before the inside of the building was gutted. But we'll explain a little bit more about that in a short while. Looking on to something that we're actually doing very similarly at this minute. We've been asked to write a new archaeology and history of St. Peter's Church at Cogan Hall. in the other part of the Vale of Glamorgan, because they didn't want the Glamorgan Archaeological Trust to do it because they don't like them. They wanted us to do it, so we've decided to take on the job ourselves. And what we're finding with that site is the way buildings decay. At St Peter's Church in Cogan Hall, it's the only church that I know of that is recorded in the annals that people got married on the roof. It said a couple in about 1850 got married in the roof. And we're reading on the roof, yeah. And we're reading, why have they got married in the roof? Well, if you look a few years after... On the roof. Right?
Is that a flat roof?
Hang on, you're moving too far, right? So if you look at the wording, it says they got married on the roof, right? And the choir entered the church and were part of the service, and the service continued on the roof. And we're thinking, how have they got married on the roof? Well, the clue is actually after and before. The description's after the floor that the roof has collapsed, and before it's saying that the site is in a state of ruin. They got married on the roof because the roof was on the floor. And there's these little nuances of history that help you understand history a lot more and archaeology. And it's the sense of, again, back to this site, it's the sense of the people actually getting buried in the chancel area long after the monks have left. So what I want to do, I want to look at that wonderful image. I think that's, hang on a minute, I'll give you the name of this girl now, is it? Yeah, that's Nikki. We seem to get loads of Nickies in these excavations. That's Nikki.
Telephone number?
No, I haven't got a telephone number, no. I tell you what, Michelle listens to these recordings and she's not happy with some of the things I say. Particularly all the flirting in the room, particularly with Steve.
Oh.
She's missed my flirting with you, Steve.
Is she?
Yeah, she has.
Oh.
Right. There's quite some bold statements I'm going to read here. It's all part of the sort of the archaeological experience. A certain Emma Lagan writes, she worked on the site between 2010 and 2013. She writes, I will always say this field school was the best decision of my life. I am in my second year of a PhD program studying bioarchaeology, and I doubt I'd be here if it weren't for the Black Friary. It's an interesting statement. However, there is Nikki. As a student and now as a staff member, Black Friary has always been a great place for learning from my own experiences on site and through the relationship I've built with students and staff. And she's one of the supervisors on site now. And this is why we do archaeology. Because archaeology helps some people. They used to say this. This is quite a bit of a bold sort of statement. They used to say that women used to do archaeology because they were able to lose themselves in the past because their home life was so atrocious. It's an old statement I read years ago. I'm not sure which archaeologist. And lots of women used to do archaeology because they used to have rich husbands and they didn't have anything to do. I think Kathy mentioned something like this a while ago. They had rich husbands and they didn't have anything to do, so they ended up doing archaeological excavations. Or they were married to very famous archaeologists like Sir Mortimer Wheeler, and Mrs. Wheeler eventually undertakes archaeological excavations. But now archaeology is about a lot more. Women are involved a lot more in archaeology because they might have a better understanding for some areas of archaeology than men actually do. Women are drawn to archaeology because it's a massive sense of readjustment, because they can add a contribution to what they feel about the past, other than what male archaeologists have felt about the past. Very few female archaeologists have ever come to the fore in archaeology, but we do have Kathleen Kenyon, we have the wife of Sir Mortimer Wheeler, we have Dorothy Garrard, we have a few named female names in archaeology. Chiquita Hawkes.
Bloody husband standing in the background.
the one thing is, Kathleen Kenyon didn't put up any nonsense for many men. But the fact of the matter is that this is a massive readjustment of the past. And not that I'm a massive feminist, but sometimes it might come across that way. But it's great when we read articles, when we used to read articles, for example, a female was found with a blacksmith's anvil and a blacksmith's hammer. Even though her bone structure looked as if she did heavy work, the blacksmith's hammer and the blacksmith's anvil had to have belonged to her dad or her brother. The evidence is there. And you look at who the article's being written by, it's being written down by a bloke in the Council for British Archaeology's own magazine. This was only a few years ago. I remember reading the article, I got so angry that day, because archaeology has not been an open playing field, but now it is. And I know I've mentioned this female thing, and it's come to a conclusion today, where it's being able to understand the past from all those different heads as the past represented, rather than a male perspective. So we've got something rather interesting with this image. We've got this along here. And what this along here is, if we can zoom in a bit more, if I may zoom in. What we've got there, we've got stairs, we've got a really thick wall, and this is actually a trench here of a completely robbed out wall. And trying to find robbed out walls in archaeology is really important, because archaeology is something that studies a period of the past, not necessarily all the past, because we can't understand all the past. In archaeology, understands a moment in the past, and that's all we've got. We've got that last moment, that final ceiling layer of archaeology, that multifaceted layer, but it's still one moment of history. And this is that trench along there that's rubbed out a wall alongside these steps. Very strange that. Why didn't they just go a bit further on and rob the wall out? But this is the thing about monasteries. This is a great secret. If somebody says you can have that stone along there, you can have that stone along there, and nothing else. You've got to leave that bit there, and you'd have to leave it there. And this is where the lead comes in. This is where that little secret of the lead comes in quite nicely. So, a nice bit of information that's going to come to you now. You can look at that image. Unfortunately, what I need to do in the next lecture, I need to bring loads of nice images of men forward so Kathy can ogle over them, like she did that day with that gentleman from Lindisfarne. I've even given her the guy's number and everything, and a photograph. A brief description of the friary. The Dominican Friary of St. Mary was founded in 1263. So back to that original point, 1263. Christianity's been in Ireland for the best part of, I guess part of 700 years, 800 years, if I want to be shot down by God. But 700-800 years, so there must have been these monastic establishments in Ireland, it's obvious. But all that sense of monasticism was erased by this new monasticism coming over from the continent, like the Cistercians, like the Carthusians, the Dominicans, the Benedictines, and so on and so on. And this whole sense of new Catholicism from Europe was the sense of suppressing what was there before. And the irony of history is that in 1542, that very religion that was used to suppress the people was suppressed itself by Henry VIII. Pardon?
Ironic.
How ironic! It is ironic. And the one thing I would say, you mentioned a bit of irony there, but one thing I will say is that William I, proclamation as king on the 25th of December, note the date, 1066, when he was proclaimed king by the synod and all the council and everything else, he was bestowed upon him the wealth of the whole of Britain. He now owned the whole of Britain. He owned it. He owned you. He owned everything. He owned all the buildings, everything. And that included the religion, which was Christianity. He was a Christian himself. So by owning Britain, he was able to come in and say, actually, you know the monastic orders that you've got before? Because I own that land, right? We're going to have our own monastic order replacing it, like the Cistercians. We'll just replace that one by there. Put a few Cistercian houses in Wales. Actually, a few more than a few. And then that was nicely put in check. And I've said this time and time again. If you wanted to smite the king, so say, for example, you're hearing, Keith, that your actions against the king, right, have made the king very angry. You know that 1,000 acres?
Mm-hmm.
I want it back. And I'm going to send my men around to seize the land back next week. Well, you've heard about this, right? The way around this is to give those 1,000 acres to the church. The king can't take the land off the church. It's 1,300. So you smited the king. You might even get a job as an abbot. I can imagine you doing the old cider and looking after the bees. You could, a new job, job done.
And when you did that and declared yourself a little monastery, you didn't have to pay taxes either.
That's really cynical, Harris. Now, come on. Keith's not that intelligent. He only worked as a bureaucrat for all those years. He wouldn't think anything like that. The point is, with all this picture, this wonderful painted picture, by the 1500s, the king knew that a big chunk of Britain now belonged to the church. However, who owned the land technically from the beginning? The king. So he's just taking back what belonged to him. And the Queen could claim the same thing today, but I don't think she'd get away with it, even though I'm a staunch monarchist. I would give up my coat for the Queen to wear.
You'd put it in a puddle.
No, I wouldn't put it in a puddle. It might damage it.
Walk over.
Yeah, exactly. The Friary footprint was never built over, and this means that we have the very rare opportunity to explore the full extent of the buildings. Very rare opportunity. Even with the Grey Friars in Cardiff, a big chunk of it had already been built on. The Black Friars in Cardiff, a part of it had been eroded into the sea. If you look at anything like Lantony, all the way down to, if you look at Lantony, for example, a big chunk of that's actually built on by modern farm buildings and stuff. So even though that's a great example to visit, that we're going to be visiting, it's not a great example. We need to see the template, the footprint, and what's going on. Even though we don't get remains standing above the surface, it's good to get that template, to understand those monastic gardens, the cemetery, all those buildings that survive. While we have confirmed the presence of burials of the town's people through our excavations, which are ongoing, there may in fact have been a second cemetery for the friars that they're wishing to find. Every digging season, every excavation season, it aids their understanding and adding to the complexity of this very surprising and large and very important site. It's so often that we hear, this is the most important find ever in history. But it's when you get examples where you're able to explore the landscape and what it was to have a monastery in an area, and then to see its gradual demolition and see that in sequence as it's being excavated. Equally, finding something that's been demolished gives you an understanding of what was important to the values of people in 1542 and who were actually undertaking it. We've got evidence that this was probably one of the richest monastic houses in the whole of Ireland, and it survived because of the existence of Purbeck marble. For those that don't know what Purbeck marble is, walking through some of the halls of, I think City Hall in Cardiff, I think that they've got Purbeck marble there. You can actually see all the little fossils in the Purbeck marble, and it's beautifully polished up. That's Purbeck marble. And we'll show you some images of that. But this had been taken from the south coast, from Dorset, the coastline of Dorset, and it had been taken, the Purbeck quarries, all the way to Ireland. So it tells you of the wealth of these houses. And that also tells you something else. When we look at the background of Ireland, we think about Ireland as being very poor, a bit like our own land, very poor. bit like Scotland, very poor. But these were very rich places until the Normans got there. The Normans and the English bled Scotland dry, for example. But before then, these countries were very, very wealthy. And the wealth is proven by the very finding of the Purbeck Marble. Because there's a large number of monastic houses across the whole of Britain, you can't have benefactors paying for all these monastic houses to be constructed. For example, we've no real idea how many monastic houses were in Britain at one stage, but I'll give you an idea that in Russia, before the Russian Revolution, there was up to 60,000 churches alone across the whole of Russia. And now there's only 6,000 open. Across Russia, for example, there are only about 18 monastic houses, and there were thousands of them before the Russian Revolution. It's almost as if when a major event occurs in history, like the Revolution, the state takes back the land, i.e. from the church. Hasn't really so much happened in Ireland to a massive degree because they've got lots of their churches open, but the monastic houses were closed down. To have the wealth of Purbeck Marble tells you the amount of wealth that was being generated within that one area alone. That through those tithes, through the money collected from the local people, that paid for this monastic house to keep going. To have the Purbeck Marble, and again shows you how wealthy Ireland once was. It gives a good argument for an independent Ireland, united, but that's completely political and the wrong way to go. What's happening is what we're finding over here. Throughout the backfill here, we're finding that this is actually full of bits of glass, tiny bits of lead, little secrets. And you would think, for example, when you think of lectures at Tinton, that people would have lovingly taken out the lead windows and taken out the glass and then put the glass in one cart and the lead in another cart, right? That's not what's happening. What's happening here is that people are just tearing down the lead, smashing the panes on the floor, right? The glass goes everywhere. This is preserved in archaeology. It's not written down. It's preserved. It's full of loads of bits of glass. They're ripping these things out, chucking them down, right, and taking all the lead out, putting that on the cart. The cart goes away. That's the job of the individual, right? It's not the job to collect the glass. The glass was very valuable, but that was somebody else's job. My job is to take the lead out, right? That's what I'm getting paid for. That's what my paymaster wants. He wants the lead, for example. And we see all this in one excavation. In 2017, they come up with 1,600 pieces of glass in a very small area of excavation. So we're talking about no idea how much glass is across the site. But this in the ditches, they're basically ripping them out, chucking them off, taking the lead out, cart going off. That's what they're doing. That's the real process. And this is what we're finding in the archaeology. I used to think, when I used to go to Tinton, right, somebody lovingly used to take out the glass, put it there and melt that down and stuff. That's not what's happening. It's not what's happening at all. So again, we're learning from the archaeology what is really going on. I'm thinking, hang on, if we go back again quickly, can't really see it, but in these areas, they're on the floor level, we're finding that after they've taken the lead windows out, they must have set fire to the whole building. And the reason why we're saying that is that if they'd have set fire to the building with the windows still there, the lead and glass would have all melted and fused together. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing that the windows were already, all the window furniture was being torn down alongside all the lead and all the rest of it. Then they have the fire. And that's the process, because you don't find bits of burnt lead around the site. So even by looking at those areas, we know the process of what's going. Lead out some of the window furniture, set light to the timber. Timber should have been valuable, they're setting light to it. And maybe there's a reason why they're doing that. Maybe it had a thatched roof or something. Or maybe, as we probably think, it was it was a tiled roof, and then if you're burning that, you can use that for ballast and all sorts of things, and whatever process.
Maybe they hated them because they bled them dry for years.
But you still wanted the lead. The lead is there. So, yeah, they bled them dry for years. Kathy's not a fan of monasteries, are you, Kathy? Good. She loves the Queen. Right, okay.
I come from a school where everybody sat down when somebody started the national anthem.
Where did you go to school?
One of the teachers is standing there, this is the national anthem!
Where did you go to school?
I was burning.
Right, let's move on.
Fast.
Right, okay. A little plan of the landscape. We'll have a couple more images and we'll take a break. So we've got the Black Friary over here. Over here we've got the Augustine steeple. This is where the Augustine Friary would have been, by here, on the outskirts again. So you've got this here, we've got the tomb. So you've got the huge steeple there still surviving. Also it's got the remains of a castle as well. You've got Trim Castle. And you've got a set of town walls. So in a way this is very similar to Cardiff, but it's very similar to any large medieval town across Britain. Where you've got a castle, you've got these monastic houses, Cardiff. You've got the town hall wall, Cardiff. You've got a river access, Cardiff. So this is why we've got sort of parallels with a site like this. Moving on a little bit more. What we'll do, we'll have that in the background. Now that is high resolution LiDAR imagery, which we will explain in a short while. I'll just get some more notes up a minute. Right, good. And then we'll take a break because Sarah's going to go over to the pub and buy me and Dennis a glass of lemon and lime. Right, the Black Friary excavations running since 2010. It was out of accident that they actually started working there. It was the Dominican Friary itself. They were laying pipelines and cables across the landscape, within the town and here. And they said, hang on a minute, the archaeology is really well preserved here, so we've got to be really careful with it. This is a really interesting image which we'll come on to now. I'll get on to this. It's one of those sites that hasn't been excavated until 2010 because there wasn't the money to do it. But when you get people paying what they pay to excavate this site, there is the money to do it and to employ people to keep the thing going all year round, even if you have seasonal excavation. You can imagine if you've got 4 volunteers paying $3,500 to $4,000, that's going to be enough to keep one archaeological staff member in a job for a whole year. So anyway, moving on from that. So what you've got all these. The LiDAR has ignored these modern buildings, but what we've done, we've put these back on the map, right? And over here you've got the gardens, the modern gardens, and the boundary of the modern gardens is the precinct ditch of the wall that goes around this monastic house. And you've got another area here, which might have been the demesne, the private gardens associated with this. These are the private gardens of the head friar, the abbot. So it's here. That's his own gardens. The rest of the land shows evidence of agricultural activity here, actually within the area of the Black Friary itself. So you've got a ditch going around the outside. This isn't really traceable today, but the LiDAR is tracing it. And look at that there. The ditch comes around there. You've got an entranceway into the precinct. This is the modern supermarket. Underneath here, this whole area are the burials. Here, we're going into the chancel, the bell tower, the bit of a nave here, the massive cloister. Get an idea of the cloister. It's a huge cloister. For those that don't know what a cloister area is, it's an open space, a veranda area. So you've got a single height roof with some nice Purbeck pillars, and arched. It's an arcade along here. So you've got light coming in from both sides really, and you've got the open area, you've got the cloister. This is a contemplative area. You might sit there with a missal, read, think about life. And this is an extremely large area, and you've got the evidence of the Purbeck marble, and you've got, if you look there, you've got evidence still surviving. This is obviously proof that not much has happened agriculturally. So if I can zoom in on that, you can actually see the ridge and furrow systems there within this area, little boundaries and so on. So you've got the accommodation for the friars further up, and lots more to play for in this area that they're still investigating. Still need to find the friars' graves.
But is it 2 cloisters?
That's classed as a courtyard area, but I haven't really excavated it yet, Kathy. Maybe there's 2 cloisters. Good spot. Where you've got a sense of the cloistered areas at Tinton, for example. Cloisters were very important, but this very large cloister in itself. You might have a good point there.
Well, the church is more often to the north of the cloister than...
Not on this one.
Assuming that is facing north.
Yes, it is facing north. I've got quite a lot of images coming up, but what I'm going to do, to give you an idea of what's going on, we're gonna close this a minute. Oh, I can't because I can't see what I'm doing. This has actually worked quite well because Lynn's not in the room. We should probably curse this now. Right, we've got we don't need to see that. Not yet. Oh, there we go. Bingo.
Oh, how surprising.
Oh right, yeah, my book signing. I was going to mention if anyone's coming along to that. Where's this little plan? Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on, there was a little plan that I've just missed. It's your fault, Sarah.
I know. Technology need them up.
Yeah, you've ruined my life. Hang on, where's this plan? Oh, there it is. There it is. That's actually the plan itself. So you've got the chancel, the nave, belfry. These are the areas they're excavating now. Cloister, courtyard, all these outbuildings here. A chapter house. You'll have probably have the library by there. And some of the outbuildings for the monks to actually stay in or stay at. But this hasn't been excavated yet, so Kathy might have a point. Another cloistered area, because it's very similar to that one.
No fish pond?
No fish ponds, and there should be. Do you know what I used to say whenever you used to go in a field, and you had all these humps and bumps in the field as a monastic range? You said fish ponds. What are they? Fish ponds. What happened in a fish pond? Fish. Job done. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break. Are there any questions?
Just one of the images you showed at the beginning was the skeleton.
Yeah.
Why was that so near the surface and not buried deeper?
It
It looked like about a foot down.
yeah, it's not. They're not that deep at all. It's not because you've got rocky soil or I can't answer that, but we do see that throughout history there are different levels for how and where people are buried. In Barry, they're just buried about an inch below the surface, yeah, and then the bodies are taken out and then sold on eBay.
Yeah.
Right, any more questions?
Goes in the pies,
It goes in the pies. If there's no more questions, we'll take a break. Sweeney. No, it wasn't found on the island, man. No. So those are symmetrical. Those are sort of semi-symmetrical, and I don't want Steve to say it, but that looks like something else. But we do get.
I'm not saying anything.
We do get intact bits of lead on site, but most of the lead has been taken away with the way I've actually described it. So obviously the series of excavations, this is going sort of back to the start again, the series of excavations, they've not just been excavating at this site, they've been excavating all the way across the town of Trim itself. And what they're finding as well, as they're laying pipelines throughout the streets of Trim, they're actually finding that most of the most of the street pattern within the middle of Trim itself today follows completely the original medieval street pattern from the past. So obviously when you get lots of the names of the streets today, they're sort of following the early street pattern that existed in the medieval period. So we've got the initial geophysical image that you've already seen from 1988 that suggests the full layout of the Friary buildings north of the medieval town wall, and they projected that it was sort of, you know, the full ground plan was intact back in the day. So excavations are obviously allowed to be undertaken at the site. There's a different law in Ireland. And the burial ground itself for the Friary complex was found directly. If we can just go off that, as we've already mentioned as well. Oh God, there we go. When they were actually doing work for the supermarket, they actually found lots of the burials under the supermarket itself, and lots under the car park. So, and the full extent of the excavations today, you can actually see they've only excavated a very small section of it. But again, we'll come back to this plan. So back to that little bit of lead that we've actually already seen. We will get through this, I hope. I'll just go through my notes, enlarge that again, and go back to. So where did Lynn and Chris say they were this week?
Iceland.
Oh, fair enough. There's somewhere to go, isn't it?
On a cruise ship.
On a cruise ship.
Nice.
So let's go back to that plan a bit. I should have just kept it up there. Hang on. Let's just get this cursor. Yeah, they said they were going to Iceland. She's going to bring me back some cheese, apparently. The stuff made with bacterial laced hands. Right. Okay. We can just get to there. So obviously, these notes refer to the church's significant amount of the nave and south aisle of the church and the bell tower, and bits of the chancel have actually now been exposed. So you've got a little bit of a ground plan. So lots of the images that we will be seeing are associated with what the areas they've already excavated. The domestic buildings themselves, there's a large range of domestic buildings. Those domestic buildings, the eating hall for the friars, the hospitalum for the friars themselves. They found unusual things on site, not just a Purbeck marble. They've actually found bits of chainmail on the site, which can take you off into a number of different directions. And what they've actually been doing as well, they've been working within this sort of area as well, trenches across this, to get an idea of the field systems and the types of agriculture that these friars were actually involved in hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The cloister itself, this area here, is large by any standards, and is the largest known example known anywhere in Ireland. It's probably one of the largest examples this part of Europe. And obviously, lots of the pillars and lots of fragments of the Purbeck marble actually standing, still left in areas and in fragmentary form. So this is Purbeck marble. We've all seen this, yeah? Lots of train stations and stuff around the country have this type of marble. And again, this talks about the great levels of wealth within the landscape that this site is to be found within. Burials, we've got 150 burials actually being found within that supermarket area. The skeletal remains suggest the site was used as a medieval cemetery all the way into the late 1500s. During the last period of burial, long after the buildings had slowly started to be demolished, the Black Friary became the final resting place for many who were excluded from burial in consecrated ground, particularly unbaptized children. Any other faith, like the Jewish faith, would have been buried there. Criminals would have been buried there. And maybe those people that chose to be Protestants that were buried there in a highly Catholic area. Artifact, tens of thousands have been excavated, tens of thousands of artifacts have been excavated at the site. along with large amounts of pottery that have been made locally, and lots of pottery made by the monks themselves. Thousands of fragments of stained glass, floor tile, numerous architectural fragments, as we've already mentioned, with a Purbeck marble, medieval coins, bucket loads of them, bone pins, metal artifacts of various types, horse fastenings, rivets, all sorts of things like that. Small pieces of chainmail have also been retrieved. What it sort of conjures up the idea of the Knight Templars from old. So the stained glass itself, and what we'll do, we'll show you a fragment of the stained glass there. And lots of this stained glass is actually in Cardiff at this minute, being examined by the University at Cardiff. Among many significant finds, the amounts of medieval stained glass which have been recovered have concentrated in cuttings where there's lots of stone, where there's lots of bits of stone. So as they're ripping the big nice stone out there, they're leaving those small bits of stone. Already the stained glass has been ripped out and the glass lay smattered throughout it. The lead being recycled. And here in my own notes it says thousands of pieces of glass were found mixed in with the building rubble. Later use, most of the building's already pulled down, but bits of it used for farming. But the main thing is the remains that we're actually finding associated with the friars themselves. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a few images now, if we can get them. So, okay.
You say they found mail and things. Were there people buried in arms and armour, or was it people?
No, they
put
found
like a
scattered
raid?
around the site, so it could be anything. You know, could be to do with anything. There's the castle. There's the Augustinian Tower. Apparently this Augustinian Tower was the tallest standing structure in Britain at one stage. It was a huge tower, much taller than the one at Ely. So this, again, we're looking at here down towards the castle and the Augustan building. But again, the street plan based very much on what it was in the medieval period. Moving on. And in some areas, I don't know why this is the case, but they found big clunks of lead. So obviously, I don't know what's happening. This would have been extremely valuable as in the past as it is today. Whoever's collecting this lead together must have got distracted, or even better, part of the building collapsed in the area where they were actually storing the lead, which would make more sense, because this was found in amongst a load of rubble. So whoever put this there, they've lost their lead forever. And this is what the archaeologists are finding. I don't know if there's plans to sort of unravel that lead. It's possible, and to give you a bit of a layout of what this window looked like. That would be absolutely fascinating. But the lead, unfortunately, is going to be very, very brittle. So it's going to something like this, a huge nodule of lead, all the little bits of leading from the stained glass windows. This would be a work of about 5 or 6 years to just unravel this. It would be a wonderful project, because you could start thinking, bits of lead, bits of the glass that we found in this area would naturally relate to this lead, because they're ripping the window down, they're collecting it together, putting it in a ball, leaving it there, putting it in a sack, and all the glass would be around. So you never know. Getting really excited, they could reconstruct that very window, which would be a first, really. Again, another first. Looking into, we're talking about the area where you find the nave, leading on to chancel. You've got the layers of rubble. As they're demolishing the buildings, what we're seeing as they're demolishing the buildings, they're going deeper and deeper. So they're taking the rubble out. The stone, the small bits of stone are going this side, and the mortar and all the frescoes and all the rest of it, all the glass and stuff is piling up. They're going deeper and deeper, and the trenches are getting more and more dangerous as they're taking the stone out. So they think that's too dangerous. We'll just leave it go, and this is why we've got all these layers of rubble. They're just systematically looting the site, but they're not going to the lowest levels in most places because it gets far too dangerous for them, because there's just too much of the small rubble that they don't need lying around. You know, big bits of masonry like this still lying around the site, probably not able to retrieve it. That's some of the evidence of. We've got fragments of Purbeck marble at the site, so they sliced it through, and this would indicate directly which quarries within the Purbeck landscape on the south coast and Dorset, where this precisely comes from. You can work out the quarries where it came from originally. Okay, let's keep going. I didn't dig up many photographs of the pottery that they've been finding. Lots of the pottery is actually being made on site. So we haven't actually got evidence of the kilns yet, but it's likely that this pottery itself was made by the very clergy that actually lived at this site, because all the monks, all the friars, actually had skills. They were the miners, they were the potters, they were the candlestick makers, the road builders of the day. When they come over, they reintroduce those skills. In fact, this is the archetype for the Roman legion. In fact, Roman legionaries were all skilled and trained. The legacy of Christianity, the legacy of Rome is Christianity. And you look at the monks as being people who were reintroducing those skills into Britain. And those were the same people who were actually making those leaded windows in the first place. And just wanted to show you this. This was from 1988, the geophysics. And you've got the LiDAR, which is superimposed by some of the planning here, and you can see that over time technology has improved, but in a way the LiDAR was very accurate back in the day. 30 odd years ago, big cloister area. This is where they're understanding where to excavate. Big depressions in the ground, and then we're going into this area. This is very largely higgledy-piggledy, which they haven't excavated yet, so it'll be interesting to see a bit more of what that's about. We mentioned that. Mentioned the excavation area, obviously wanting to go further out and find more. And lots of the place names around the site as well. You know, with something like this, even though you don't get the even though you don't get the monastic houses surviving, what you do get is place names. We'll just have a quick look at some of the names that might be familiar. Sort of give you when we go to somewhere like when you go to places like Cardiff and Shrewsbury and stuff, you know, the old monastic remains survive in the place names. Black Friary Road down here. You've got the likes of Priory Grove, the Priory. You've got Friary View, quite appropriate. You've got Tower View, so this overlooks. So when you look at place names, it sometimes helps to understand you know, what the past was like, even though those remains no longer exist within that landscape. Okay, let's see what else we've got. This was found. I think this year actually. They've got a little bit of ivory, and it's an ivory pointer, and a little bit of this. I'm not exactly sure where they found this. I think they may have found it in the Nave building. But you've got an ivory pointer, and what a pointer is that you have a book on. You have a book there, and basically a pointer. Instead of touching it, you use a pointer to move the pages, or a pointer to look at the words on the page. That's what a pointer is.
You can get those to put on the top of pencils, can't you?
Yeah, not an ivory one. Again, really good, well-preserved bits of walls associated with some of these outbuildings. And as we carry on with these, we look and we see, we've seen this. Like this is obviously painted glass, so abandoned through their scores around the site. Seen this one. And this again, high resolution. This is the LiDAR showing the cloister area. They haven't really examined this, and the idea that this could even be another cloister because it looked very similar to the one down here. Large wings around here, tower-like structure, more buildings. These are the accommodation blocks where all the clergymen would have slept. And again, this demesne, this sort of large garden for the abbot himself, and more of this that isn't shown on the surface. So the precinct ditch around the outside and all. Just a few more. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you. Look at that beautiful piece of glass. So this, you might think, oh, why did they just abandon this? And you're thinking, well, if you look into people's gardens today, you can see chest of drawers, you can see abandoned cars, and you can see all these different things, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, right? I would have loved to have had that chest of drawers, but to that person who chucked it out, they didn't want it anymore, right? And the people back then, they thought the best buck that they can make is by ripping the glass out, ripping the lead out, okay? By smashing the huge panes on the floor and just getting as much lead away as you possibly can. So what we're going to do, I've got, for the last few minutes of this, don't moan too much, Pete. So what I'm going to do now is I want to show you some last images. This is an excavation report from very recently. We'll just go through this quick. A few burials, and then we'll call it a day. So where are we? Come on, get down the page. Oh, there we go. Loads of. This is actually directly from the report itself. So we'll bring this in. There you go. And what we have, we can scroll down. We've already seen this. Let's enlarge a little bit more. If I may, enlarge. Good. Okay, there. Scroll down. This is from the report. I'll just go through this quickly. Hang on. Come on. Let me scroll down. So obviously a large area they've excavated now. Some nice chunks of wall, the nave wall. Traces of wall again have been robbed. Again, the process of understanding how a building's been robbed. You know, whole bits of wall, they just left the core at the bottom now. And this layer that I mentioned earlier on, this thick layer of burning across the site. So obviously, Kathy, you had a good point earlier on. They've just decided that they've had enough of these people, and they've had enough of the memory. After they've taken the lead out of the windows, they've just burnt what they could. And I just want to quickly go through this a minute. Hang on. See again, traces of wall are almost gone, but you can get an idea where they are. I'm just going to get to the interesting one. Right, that's another one of these little leaden ventilation hoods that you've actually just seen. The other one is more complete. These little things survive. Obviously, what they've done, they've taken the big bits of leaden window out, smashed it on the ground. The glass has gone everywhere, and some of these little bits have survived. Some of these little bits have survived through to tell us really what's going on. Again, more traces of these tiny little bits of wall, and again, ghosts of walls there. But they do survive, to give you an idea of the landscape of archaeology. But little, wonderful little gems like this, where you've got a nice bit of wall, and you've actually got this is actually a beaten floor with stone in it. So you can get an idea that they're demolishing the wall, and all the crap is building up there. Big bits of stone are falling in there. This wall has survived. This is what we're talking about as you're walking around the building itself, the actual floor level. And just a couple more moments. And this place de resistance, where we find areas where the whole bits of the site are gone, we find a threshold, a fluted bit of stonework there, a nice bit of stone that's still carved there, and the place de resistance. They missed this, that you've got stonework which has got mortar on it, a painted fresco on it. So these little bits, these little gems still survive. You wouldn't have found this. You wouldn't have known this was there if you would have done the geophys or the aerophotography, but by excavating, flowing to the floor level, we've got these wonderful little bits of archaeology left that you can actually see. How they're going to preserve this, I don't know. They probably might need to backfill this little bit to protect the mortar, as they should do with any other sites, you know, such as Roman sites. When you find mortar, it's best to backfill to protect it. And then again, these big floor levels where you're going down. And I want to. What's that? I'm just trying to get to one last image. Hang on, these bodies. So when they're excavating, burial 121, this is from 2017, we've got 50 burials, 150 burials so far. It's 12:41, Keith. Do you need to go?
I'm going, yeah.
Has everyone else got just 5 minutes left?
Yeah.
5?
Is his
Okay
head
then.
missing?
What's that?
Is the head
His head is missing.
No.
You two have got to go as well, have you?
Okay,
Okay,
I'll
then.
see you on Sunday.
Well, we've nearly finished, though. Everyone else stay here, and I'll say goodbye to this lot in a minute. Okay. Keith, I'll see you Sunday, 8 o'clock, train station. If the bed goes right, you know what happens.
Bye everyone.
See ya.
See you then, Keith. Good dib. I'm right then, yeah, I'll see you next week. Take care,
It would
Keith.
take you to make that.
See you, Andrea. Bye.
15, 20
Bye.
minutes?
No.
Yeah. Takes about 30 minutes to make that. That's more time of continuing grade and things.
No.
Oh,
I wouldn't know where to
oh,
start.
you're off.
It's just
Well, I will I'll see you next week. How you going?
6 pieces, about 12 foot long, folded in half. And then just start grading. Split it halfway. So we got 2 grades of 6. So you're going 3 groups of 2, so you're 2, 2, 2. Bring it over to the end.
When you know what you're doing, it makes it sound easy.
I had that feeling quite often when I used to.
Do you grade your books?
My sister used to do it for me. I tried once and I gave up. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do this. And I was all over the place. So, but no.
I like the bullets, you know, you just.
Right, just 2 minutes to go, folks. So,
There's some refrain as well.
right. So obviously, what you've got some of these human remains. They've cut another a cut in there, and it's just taken out the head completely. So really nice set of limbs there. Obviously, a really good diet, but we've lost the rest of the body, and this one's the other way around.
He's legless.
Yeah, the grave cuts come in there, and we've lost the lower half of the body. So basically, what's happening over a long period of time, they're excavating within this area, new and fresh graves. You've got another grave coming in there, another grave coming in there. So that just basically missed that bit of the body, and any bones that are collected go into the charnel pit. Just see a few more, and we'll just a few more bodies. That's really intact. Again, they're in really good state of preservation, these bodies. Really good state. Really good diet. So obviously...
Tall as well, they look.
Pardon?
They look quite tall.
They are quite tall, yes. And the point is, not only are we... these are the domestic people. And not only are the poor people, they've got a really good diet. And they're contributing so much to the church. I don't know what... The bodies of the friars, their health must have been second to none. Because if the poor were like this, what were the friars like?
Well, their health possibly wasn't. They were probably all fat then.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
All right, then move on.
Like Friday
And-
time.
And if you look here, this is actually quite a small person actually. So if you look here, the grave cut is quite tight to the body. So they're not put in coffins; they're put into a shroud, and it doesn't look like. Well, to be honest with you, I would argue that they weren't actually put in a shroud at all. Because with a shroud, you usually got it bound, and there's usually a ring on it. There's no sign of that. So
arms are back like that instead of.
yeah, it's really tight. It's really tight. It is really tight.
And the legs quite wide apart, mind you,
and you've got another grave in there. This probably cuts into an earlier grave. And again, what we've got here is that later on, what they've got is evidence is that later on they're actually laying a lane across, a drain across the site. And yeah, and it's damaging the body as they're cutting the drain across. That's what they've got. So they've got a long way to go with this excavation, and what they're doing now is experimenting with what the ditch looked like, and over a long period the ditch was silted up. You've got different areas of silting, but that would be another lecture. So what I'm going to do, we will obviously, like all the sites that we've been looking at, that's that object that we've. I don't think it's the pointer that we're looking at, but that's another pointer in there. It doesn't look the same one. But obviously that's the pointer. We've got box loads of glass and little bits of lead that have ended up surviving. You know, lots of glass, bits of lead that have ended up surviving, off to be packaged and analysed. And this site continues to be a site of interest for the community and will continue to do so. Are there any questions? No? Have you all enjoyed that today? Yeah? Good.
What's the lecture next week?
Oh, I'm not saying.
I won't be here. If it's Roman, I'll miss it.
Actually, it might be.
Oh, can you change it? So that I don't
Do you
miss
mean
it.
you haven't decided, or you're really not telling us?
I'm really not telling you. Because Trellocs the week after. I've been putting Trelloc off for weeks.
I've been there, haven't I?
Yeah, with the gang. Right, thank you very much, folks. Is there any other questions?
No.
Good. Today's lecture is about archaeological excavation in Ireland.
Oh.
What do you mean? Oh,
We're in Liverpool Island, thank
Good.
you.
we've only done one lecture on Ireland, for God's sake. This,
There's no Romans there.
Yeah.
Don't get a Guinness and we'll have a good lecture.
actually, right, thank you. Thank you. Right, we're going to be looking.
I specifically said I want more on it.
Sorry, Carl, that sounds wonderful. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm glad. You know,
Yeah,
I sometimes feel that I'm abused and confused in this room. You know, I'm often ashamed to say that you know, I'm not loved.
Oh.
Right, so we're going to be looking.
No.